aid, gift-giving, defense, and trade became possible, bringing immense benefits to the societies that possessed them. With such clearly adaptive consequences for the culture, it is not surprising that the rule of reciprocation is so deeply implanted in us by the process of socialization we all undergo. Although obligations extend into the future, their span is not unlimited. Especially for relatively small favors, the desire to repay seems to fade with time. But when the gifts are of the truly notable and memorable sort, they can be remarkably long-lived. I know of no better illustration of the way reciprocal obligations can reach long and powerfully into the future than the perplexing story of $5,000 of relief aid that was exchanged between Mexico and Ethiopia. In 1985, Ethiopia could justly lay claim to the greatest suffering and privation in the world. Its economy was in ruin. Its food supply had been ravaged by years of drought and internal war. Its inhabitants were dying by the thousands from disease and starvation. Under these circumstances, I would not have been surprised to learn of a $5,000 relief donation from Mexico to that wrenchingly needy country. I recall my feeling of amazement, though, when the news item I was reading insisted that the aid had gone in the opposite direction. Native officials of the Ethiopian Red Cross had decided to send the money to help the victims of that year's earthquakes in Mexico City. It is both a personal bane and a professional blessing that when I'm confused by some aspect of human behavior, I feel a need to investigate further. In this instance, I was able to track down a fuller account of the story. Fortunately, a journalist who had been as bewildered as I by the Ethiopians' actions had asked for an explanation. The answer he received offered eloquent validation of the reciprocity rule. Despite the enormous needs prevailing in Ethiopia, the money was sent to Mexico because in 1935, Mexico had sent aid to Ethiopia when it was invaded by Italy. So informed, I remained awed, but no longer puzzled. The need to reciprocate had transcended great cultural differences, long distances, acute famine, many years, and immediate self-interest. Quite simply, a half-century later, against all countervailing forces, obligation triumphed. If such an enduring obligation appears to be a one-of-a-kind sort of thing, perhaps explained by some unique feature of Ethiopian culture, consider the solution to another initially puzzling case. In 2015, at the age of 94, the renowned British publisher Lord Arthur George Weidenfeld founded Operation Safe Haven, which rescued endangered Christian families from ISIS-held regions in the Middle East and transported them to safety in other countries. Although observers applauded this benevolence, they criticized its narrowness, wondering why the Lord's efforts didn't extend to similarly threatened religious groups such as Druze, Alawis, and Yazidis in the same territories. Perhaps, one might think, the man was simply acting to benefit his own Christian brethren. But that easy explanation falls apart when one recognizes that Lord Weidenfeld was Jewish. He had come to England in 1938 on a kinder transport train, organized by Christian societies to rescue Jewish children from Nazi persecution in Europe. Accounting for his actions in terms that revealed the power of the rule of reciprocation, he said, "I can't save the world, but on the Jewish and Christian side, I had a debt to repay." Clearly, the pull of reciprocity can be both life-saving and lifelong. Reader's Report 2.1 from an employee for the state of Oregon, because he is a very nice and generous person. She said that he always gave her flowers and other gifts on different occasions. She decided to stop working because she was going to have a child and wanted to stay home. Otherwise, I'm sure she would have stayed on at this job for many more years. I have been working for this same boss for 6 years now, and I have experienced the same thing. He gives me and my son gifts for Christmas and gives me presents on my birthday. It has been over 2 years since I've reached the top of my classification for a salary increase. There is no promotion for the type of job I have, and my only choice is to take a test with the state system and reapply to move to another department or maybe find another job in a private company. But I find myself resisting trying to find another job or move to another department. My boss is reaching retirement age, and I'm thinking maybe I'll be able to move out after he retires because for now, I feel obligated to stay since he's been so nice to me. Author's note: I am struck by this reader's language in describing her current employment options, saying that she will be able to move to another job only after her boss retires. It seems that his small kindnesses have nurtured a binding sense of obligation that has made her unable to seek a better paying position. There's an obvious lesson here for managers wishing to instill loyalty in employees. But there's a larger lesson for all of us as well. Little things are not always little. Not when they link to the big rules of life, such as reciprocity. See Martin, Goldstein, and Cialdini for our book, The Small Big, from 2014, for a description of 50 small things that make a big impact on human behavior. How the rule works. Make no mistake, human societies derive a truly significant competitive advantage from the reciprocity rule, and consequently, they make sure their members are trained to comply with it. Each of us has been taught to live up to the rule from childhood, and each of us knows the social sanctions and derision applied to anyone who violates it. Because there's a general distaste for those who take and make no effort to give in return, we will often go to great lengths to avoid being considered a freeloader. It is to those lengths that we will often be taken, and in the process be taken by individuals who stand to gain from our indebtedness. To understand how the rule of reciprocation can be exploited by one who recognizes it as the lever of influence it certainly is, we might closely examine an experiment conducted by psychologist Dennis Regan. The subject who participated in the study rated, along with another subject, the quality of some paintings as part of an experiment on art appreciation. The other rater, we can call him Joe, was only posing as a fellow subject and was actually Dr. Reagan's assistant. For For our purposes, the experiment took place under two different conditions. In some cases, Joe did a small, unsolicited favor for the true subject. During a short rest period, Joe left the room for a couple of minutes and returned with 2 bottles of Coca-Cola, one for the subject and one for himself, saying, "I asked the experimenter if I could get myself a Coke, and he said it was okay, so I bought one for you too." In other cases, Joe did not provide the subject with a favor. He simply returned from the 2-minute break empty-handed. In all other respects, Joe behaved identically. Later on, after the paintings had all been rated and the experimenter had momentarily left the room, Joe asked the subject to do him a favor. He indicated that he was selling raffle tickets for a new car and that if he sold the most tickets, he would win a $50 prize. Joe's request was for the subject to buy some raffle tickets at 25 cents apiece. He would say any would help, the more the better. The major finding of the study concerns the number of tickets subjects purchased from Joe under the two conditions. Without question, Joe was more successful in selling his raffle tickets to the subjects who had received his earlier favor. Apparently feeling that they owed him something, these subjects bought twice as many tickets as the subjects who had not been given the prior favor. Although the Regan study represents a fairly simple demonstration of the workings of the rule of reciprocation, it illustrates several important characteristics of the rule that, upon further consideration, help us understand how it might be profitably used. The rule is overpowering. One of the reasons reciprocation can be used so effectively as a device for gaining another's compliance is its power. The rule possesses awesome strength, often producing a yes response to a request that, except for an existing feeling of indebtedness, would have surely been refused. Some evidence of how the rule's force can overpower the influence of other factors that normally determine compliance can be seen in a second result of the Regan study. Besides its interest in the impact of the reciprocity rule on compliance, Regan was also investigating how liking for a person affects the tendency to comply with that person's request. To measure how liking toward Joe affected the subject's decisions to buy his raffle tickets, Regan had them fill out several rating scales indicating to Joe. He then compared the